Hi, I'm Barbara Mitchell. I'm the Executive Director of Interim, Inc., a local nonprofit organization that has been serving Monterey County for over 45 years. I want to welcome you today to our seminar, Housing, Healing, and Hope, the Path from Homelessness to Mental Health. First, I want to thank our gold sponsors that helped to make this possible today. Wald Runke and Dost Architects, Hayashi Wayland, and the Interim, Inc. Board of Directors. For those of you unfamiliar with Interim's mission, our mission is to provide services and affordable housing supporting members of our community with mental illness in building productive and satisfying lives. I'd like to welcome our guests this afternoon. First, let me introduce Joe Livernois. Joe is the board president of NAMI Monterey County, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And he's also the editor of Voices of Monterey Bay and the former editor of the Monterey County Herald. We'll also have staff joining us, Marisol and Kevin, who are program directors for Interim's McHome program, which is our homeless outreach and services and housing program, as well as Antonio and Katrina, who are going to tell some very personal stories.
Thank you, Barbara. Let's talk about why we acknowledge Mental Health Awareness Month. Each year, millions of Americans face the reality of living with mental illness. 1 in 5 adults will experience mental illness in their life. And 1 in 20 adults will experience a serious mental illness. An estimated 25% of extended families have at least one member of their family with a serious mental illness. And the good news is that with treatment, support services, and education, mental health recovery is possible. So I'm familiar with Interim, provides great housing and extensive support services for those living with mental illnesses. But I'm asking you, Barbara, what are some of the impacts of mental illness that you see in Monterey County?
Well, mental illness can affect every aspect of someone's life, everything from their general health to their income, their ability to go to school, to get a job, and most importantly, where they live or if they have housing at all. So unfortunately, many people in our community who are homeless also have a serious mental illness. And it's often difficult to determine the exact cause of how they became homeless. What makes someone homeless? Health conditions generally have an impact, and serious mental health is a substantial contributing factor. There's other factors such as substance use issues and lack of income. Another thing that we found is that time that people spend on the streets actually makes their mental health substantially worse and increases their symptoms. Each person, though, is unique. No two homeless people are alike, and the way of working with people who are mentally ill and homeless really relies upon a unique, individualized approach. Let's watch a short clip about one of our former clients, Katrina, who now is a full-time employee of Interim, working as our peer outreach and advocacy coordinator.
I'm so grateful for what Interim has offered me when they talk about healing, housing, and hope. They're talking about me because they gave me all of that. One of the earliest memories is when Jody found me after my van had been taken. From that point that he picked me up homeless, I was able to get into the women's shelter and then into housing on Hayes Circle. I then moved to Pearl Street in Monterey. The housing Interim introduced me to on Hayes Circle allowed me to gain strength in my mind, strength in my body, It allowed me to healed some old wounds. It taught me mind over mood. I am grateful to Interim for giving me my life back. They allowed me to dream again.
Joining us now are program directors for Interim's McHome program, Marisol Jacobo and Kevin Gast. Welcome. We'll start with Marisol. Why are there so many people living homeless with mental illness on the streets? Can't people be housed? Or if they have serious mental illnesses, why can't they go to the hospital?
You know what, Joe, we get asked that question pretty often. And one of the main barriers is our homeless population. Usually they need to feel safe. And many times they've actually experienced being robbed, assaulted. So when it comes down to going into shelters, they don't always feel super safe. With that said, additionally, if they do get robbed or if there's their belongings are stolen, they lose their IDs, which then makes it very difficult for them to go ahead and get access to fully completing and submitting applications for housing. Apart from that, another thing is a lot of our clients have emotional support animals. And with that, that gives them a sense of comfort. And many times they're not open to going into a shelter if their pets can't go in there. And usually shelters do not allow emotional support animals.
So Marisol, why can't you just hospitalize people?
With a lot of the clients, usually sometimes, because of maybe substance use or not meeting criteria for a hold, it becomes a little difficult for them to get admitted into a hospital. So what we try to do for Interim, our McComb, is to go ahead and find other ways and strategies to engage our clients.
Is there enough housing available to house everyone who needs it in Monterey County?
Housing. Mm-hmm. There's definitely some challenges in terms of housing. We get the opportunity to go ahead and work with providers such as Housing Authority for vouchers, but there is definitely a challenge in terms of housing opportunities and landlords and other property management being open to taking some of those vouchers.
So you're dealing with people who come to your office directly. How do you engage people?
One of the things, with Macomb, I think we try to find different ways to engage our clients. We try to be creative. We sometimes have like a meet them where they're at approach. So if a client at the moment is just seeking food, our staff goes and literally just focuses on finding resources for food while at the same time providing some of our pantry items that we also have access to. With that, during that part and that process, our clients then build trust, rapport with our staff, which then allows them to be more open about discussing mental health as well as housing and providing their personal information, because for housing we need to go ahead and gather SSI information, income information, so it allows first trust to be built. And so food is always one of the main things, like it helps our clients engage.
Marisol, maybe just, isn't it true that very few clients come to the offices looking for us, that we're out looking for them instead? That most people that Interim targets to get housed are not people actually seeking housing. That's not what they're asking for to start with.
That is true. One of the things is that we also have an outreach engagement team, and they go out to meet the client, where they're at. So if it is that they are staying at the beach, our staff goes there and just tries to go ahead and really connect them, because a lot of the individuals who are homeless that do have a severe mental illness or they really don't always have insight into their mental health. So it does take multiple approaches for us to go out there, out in the community.
Marisol, can you just pick people up off the streets and place them into housing?
No, many of our clients don't always feel comfortable being around other people, so it is difficult to go ahead and get them to that spot.
Okay, so it's not just a case of if you build it, they will come and move into it.
Not at all. It takes time to engagement and clients to be ready to go ahead and take that next step.
Yeah, isn't it true that people have to really feel comfortable with the housing in order to even accept the idea of housing?
They do. I think it's one of the things that's super important is for our clients to to be ready, to, depending on what housing opportunities there are out there for them, to be ready to work in terms of maintaining their place once they are housed.
So Barbara, I understand that Interim serves about 2,700 clients with serious mental illnesses, and many of them are homeless.
Yes, and we have all kinds of housing in the agency. We have almost 300 people housed on any given day, and there's long waiting lists for a lot of the housing that we have. And some of the housing is designated only for people who meet specific criteria of being homeless. Other housing is just available for anyone who is very low income and has a serious mental illness. So we've been fairly successful at getting people housed, but we really need a lot more housing.
Need a lot more housing. Yeah, and despite your modern, clean housing and impressive support systems, it's still difficult to get homeless people off the streets, right?
Yeah, I think that Kevin and Marisol can really address why it's a challenge to move people into housing.
Kevin.
Sure. Well, there's a number of reasons. Just like there's more than one reason why somebody becomes homeless, there's more than one reason why it's hard to house somebody. For some people, it is that they have a mental illness, and their symptoms simply prevent them from accepting housing. We worked with this one woman for over 10 years, outreaching her, before she finally agreed to accept our services. She experienced what clinicians or psychiatrists would label auditory hallucinations or visual hallucinations, but what she thought was a gift in the ability to see into other dimensions and hear news reports from other worlds. And so she wasn't open to medications or changing her lifestyle right away. But over time, we built trust and we built rapport. And I remember the day where she said, you know what, I think I'm going to give this housing thing a try. And so she's with her case manager. I drop everything. I book her a motel room. And then I drive to the nearest Ross Dress for Less, and I buy a large luggage suitcase and a backpack. And another barrier that kind of ties in, she had this shopping cart, and everything she owned and everything she cherished was in this shopping cart. And she wouldn't part with it, and she wouldn't go into like a motel because she wouldn't leave it outside because somebody might steal all of her belongings. But also, motels don't let you just roll up with a shopping cart full of things. So her case manager meets her at a local park. They turn the cart upside down, dump everything out. Everything she wanted to keep, we put in that luggage, in that backpack. Everything she was willing to part with, we put back in the shopping cart. And then we took her to the motel, and she checked into a motel for the first time. A few months later, we got her into permanent housing, and now she's been housed for over 2 years.
That is a really innovative approach, and I think it really shows how hard the interim staff have to work to get and keep people housed. And that's something really different about McHome is that we are serving really some of the hardest to serve homeless people that there are in the community.
Another obstacle sometimes is trauma. A lot of times the reason somebody became homeless is because they experienced a traumatic event. It could be the loss of a partner or a parent or a child. It could be that they're fleeing domestic violence. It could be a number of things, but there's been a trauma. And then once they become homeless, there's been studies and statistics show that you're far more likely to be the victim of crime rather than the perpetrator of crime once you're homeless. And so there you are experiencing potentially additional trauma. And then oftentimes people respond to trauma in a number of different ways. But sometimes one way to cope with those strong feelings, the painful feelings, the trauma is to turn to substance use. Sometimes they become kind of on edge or kind of rough around the edges, maybe loud, as a way to try to keep themselves safe, to prevent people from targeting them for to be victims of crime in the future. And it takes time for people to grow to trust us, to trust people they don't know. And so a lot of times our outreach staff are going out time and time again, and it's things like offering food, offering bottled water that seems like little things, but over time it builds trust. And it takes time, and then oftentimes we are able to build trust with those individuals, and we are able to help them get into housing. So
we're really looking at the whole person, and that's why McHome provides intensive integrated services and housing for people who are homeless. And Interim provides an extensive array of services as well, and sometimes people need other services other than McHome, which is why Interim has residential treatment services, crisis residential, dual diagnosis treatment. We've learned that we can't be a kind of one path agency. There has to be multiple paths to get people to get into housing and actually to stay in housing. Although a housing first approach works with a lot of our clients, some clients it doesn't work well with, and they need treatment before they can go into housing or have a reasonable chance of being successful in the housing. We offer a number of services, including short-term crisis residential treatment, which are in our Manzanita houses, dual diagnosis residential treatment, which is in the Bridge House, and then outpatient services such as dual recovery services to help people stabilize in the community. We also offer an extensive array of services with our housing in terms of case management, mental health services, psychiatric services to help people be successful. By the way, Joe, why are you particularly interested in this issue?
Oh, well, Barbara, as young adults, my brothers and sisters and myself were estranged from our father, and it was because of his mental illness. And it wasn't his fault, wasn't our fault. It's nobody's fault, really, when there's a mental illness. No one's at fault for that. But the entire situation was handled incorrectly and wrong and bad, and nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew what was going on in his life. Nobody knew what was going on in our life. This was 50 years ago. You know, there wasn't the sort of help that is available now. So we removed ourselves from our father, and he eventually ended up homeless in San Diego, in the streets of San Diego, downtown San Diego. But somehow or the other, he ended up in León, Mexico. And he ended up there at the age of 60. Didn't speak Spanish, didn't know anybody there. He was there on for the religious experience, and then decided he was going to stay there. And he lived there till the day he died at the age of 90. But as he approached his 80th birthday, my youngest brother reached out to him. So we were all very curious about we didn't really want to engage with him, but we were curious as to how he ended up down in León, Mexico. And one thing led to another. A couple months later, we're all down in León, Mexico, reuniting with our father. And it was a great experience. We had all grown up. We were a little more understanding about him somewhat, and he was very engaging. We met a lot of his friends. We did everything there was to do in León, Mexico, and it turns out there's a lot to do there. But I came back from this Mexico with this recognition that I really didn't know much about what he was going through as an adult. And as a result, I didn't know a lot about what I was going through as a child growing up with him. And I thought I needed to really, and plus I was going through some depression issues of my own. There were other family issues that I was dealing with. So I really felt that it would behoove me to learn more about mental illness, and it's something I had avoided for way too long. And so I got myself involved with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I've been involved with them ever since, and I'm now the board president. So thanks for asking. So how has Interim had such success in housing people with mental illness? Do clients graduate from Interim?
Clients don't really necessarily graduate from Interim. They can, oftentimes they're with Interim forever, but they can graduate perhaps from Macomb. And so they may be in our program, receiving services from us, and then graduate and kind of promote into another program. Sometimes that's our permanent supportive housing or our Shelter Cove programs, temporary housing. So they do sometimes kind of move on into other programs. So they do graduate Macomb, but not necessarily Interim. Then even while they're in our housing, or even if after they've moved on from our housing, we do have other programs such as our Omni Resource Center, which there's no referral needed. Individuals with mental illness can just walk into Omni and ask about services and resources. We have a SEAS program that provides vocational training and services for clients, and we have outpatient substance use treatment through our Keep It Real program for individuals. And so even after they're no longer homeless, they're housed, maybe they've been housed outside of Interim, there's still services for them to tap into and utilize.
It's not necessarily like a straight trajectory this way. It's sometimes people go into housing and then they still need some extra support and they go into our crisis program for extra support, maybe kind of a tune-up. And what we always try and do is maintain their housing for them so that they can go back to it, because we don't want to make people homeless again. So that's something really important to Interim, is we hold people's housing for them sometimes for months while they're off in treatment once they've gotten into housing.
So one size doesn't fit all.
One size definitely does not fit all.
Yeah.
People with homelessness and mental illness are very different. Yeah. And we're going to be listening to a video of Beth's story, and that's really going to give you some examples of what kinds of services people have used in the agency.
I am so eternally grateful to Interim for giving me housing, because I could not afford to live anywhere. And because of Interim, I can live independently, successfully, and I get support. I remember people calling me names, when I was homeless in the Bay Area. And it was just very demeaning. I felt like a lowlife. And then what ended up happening was I got into Interim, and that's where the healing comes in. And what happened for me was I finally got into my own apartment at Lupin Gardens. I started working for Interim at the DRS program, which is Dual Recovery Services. And I worked there for about 6 years. In my job, I just want to help people to get off the streets and realize, and it's a lot better to sleep in a bed. We don't realize how we take for granted, being able to shower and being able to sleep in a bed and have a pillow. I have a good life today, and I just want to share it with people. And today, I have hope because I have housing. I'm happy where I'm at, because that's where the hope is at Interim.
Interim, by the way, is the only organization currently in Monterey County building brick and mortar housing specifically for people with mental illness. Interim actually leases, operates, or supports 300 permanent and transitional housing units and treatment beds in Monterey County for people with mental illness. We've been building housing since 1986 in Monterey County. For some of McComb's clients, we partner with other agencies who have built housing to obtain dedicated units in those buildings. And then we provide the supportive services to help people stay successfully housed. And really, helping people stay housed is the major task of McComb once they've gotten them housed. Kevin, can you tell us some of the things that McComb does in terms of working with landlords, working with clients, to help people be successful in housing?
Oh, sure, absolutely, yeah. And like you said, a lot of times that's the bigger challenge is keeping them housed after they've obtained housing. Then there's a number of things that come up, right? And one of the things is, I think about some of the behaviors that used to keep people safe when they're sleeping outdoors, like kind of being loud and being tough. Those are the same behaviors that neighbors do not like and landlords do not like and do not serve people well in housing. And so we have specific curriculum about just how to be a good neighbor. And we talk about it a lot in dialogue about, how do you get along with neighbors? How can you trust people? How do you be friendly with neighbors? How do you set good boundaries with people? And really it's under the theme of how to be a good neighbor. So we work with clients on that directly. We also try to serve the landlord in a sense, right? They're, in a roundabout way, they're also somebody we're serving, and we work closely with landlords to try to address and correct any concerns they may have. I think about just adjusting I've heard people talk a lot about the noise, how quiet it is when people move into their apartment for the first time after sleeping outside for so long. One of my staff, it's not my story, it's one of our staff, Sue, she has a story about a client she served who signed a lease and refused to sleep in his new apartment. And for weeks he had a lease, he was being charged rent, wouldn't sleep in the bed. So finally they compromised and he got to set his tent up in the backyard of the property. At least he was on the property, right? And after about a week, they met and they compromised again and they set up that tent in the living room of the apartment. Still not sleeping in his bed, but at least he's under a roof. And another week or two goes by, they compromise again. He sets up the tent, this time in his bedroom. And after about a month or 6 weeks or so, the gentleman starts sleeping in the bed. So it does take time. It's an adjustment, especially if being outdoors has been all you've known for sometimes decades. We do other things that are kind of less, elaborate, like buying white noise machines for clients to kind of mimic the sound of traffic. Another thing we talk about a lot is boundaries. A lot of times there's guilt. People feel guilty that their house, but their friends are still sleeping outside. So there's a lot of work around setting boundaries and how to be a good friend with to the people you knew when you're sleeping outside, but also setting boundaries so you keep your own housing. And there's things like, kind of relearning how to cook and clean and keep the apartment nice, and we do that too. So it's a lot of work to adjust to. For some folks, they just like flipping a light switch. They just adjust right away. And for a lot of folks, they don't, and it's a lot of work and a lot of coaching, and the work doesn't end when they sign their lease and move into housing.
This might be sort of an indelicate way to ask, but what does it take to get kicked out of the home?
We don't really do that very much. Certainly, if people leave the area, we serve Monterey County. If the one thing that would happen if somebody were to sort of just disappear and we don't really know where they are and we usually say at least 8 weeks. So if we go 2 months of not knowing where they are, we don't know if they're in the county or even in the state, then we might close them. But they could always come back and be reopened.
And you reminded me, we're actually leasing housing units in the community for people individually as well, using primarily federal rent vouchers. And so we are dealing with landlords, and if they are not satisfied with how we're handling making sure that the tenants are good tenants, then we will lose the housing unit. So it's really important. We are sometimes responsive to a landlord who's calling us on the weekend or in the middle of the night who's having issues with a tenant. That helps us be successful.
And joining us today on the set is Katrina McFeeder, who is the Peer Outreach and Advocacy Coordinator for Interim. And the question I have for you, Katrina, is how important really is it to have an active peer group in the path to recovery?
It's very important. I feel peers need to be at every level of the establishment, those that are providing for us. Our county and the collaborating agencies need peers, those with lived experience, my people, to actually give ideas and steer how these recovery programs are going to look. We need to be a voice in every aspect from top down.
Tell me about your experience as a peer. I mean, did you have someone that you connected with as you were coming through yourself?
So in the beginning, when I first was introduced to Interim, I was homeless, and I was found by one of the outreach workers on the old Fort Ord, right where I was born, right a block away from. I was born at the old Fort Ord Hospital. In time, he found me. I had been living in a van, and the van was taken. He found me in that old building doing his outreach. He brought me to the old Martinez Hall, which was Hayes Circle. It was the housing area for the Hayes Circle and the Macomb program. I sat in that hallway for a long time, and I kept reading the acronym, Monterey County Homeless Opportunities Make Up Empowerment. And that time was a strategic time for me because I had lost my way. I had no hope for myself at that time. And what I was offered was a whole new life. That counselor that found me took me to Martinez Hall, took away all my basic needs, said, "Here, we're going to help you." They clothed me, they fed me, they got me into a hotel room, they got me into Hayes Circle, into their housing. They allowed me to express myself and relearn how to live inside, how to not pack every night thinking that I had to go and I would have to leave. They assured me that my using, because I was still using when I first got into the program, my using would not determine my outcome. That if I tried it for their way, it was harm reduction before harm reduction was cool. And they taught me that I didn't need to depend on the drugs anymore, that I needed to depend on truly on myself, on what, and them, that I can trust them to help guide me. They took me to a psychiatrist. I talked with a psychiatrist. I talked with therapists. I got on medication. That was within itself something new and different. And I chose mental health meds above street drugs. And it worked.
Yeah. This was a peer connection that you made with a peer. Do you think that that made a big difference for you because this is someone who came through similar situations?
Yes, it did. Yeah. I remember when he first approached me, he asked if I had remembered him when he found me in that old building. And I remembered a picture. It was a painting of my little cousin throwing a basketball. And I remembered the signature. It said Jay Gully. And I'm like, "You're Jay Gully?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And that was a connection. And he asked if I trusted him, if I trusted to go with him. And I told him yes. So that was my first trusting of anything or anyone at that time, because I couldn't even trust my own mind. I was in such psychosis.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I think we were all kind of struggling trying to remember what the acronym for McHome actually stood for. And the E, the empowerment in McHome, almost kind of feels like you throw that at the end to make the acronym work. Mm-hmm. But empowerment is such an important part of the recovery process, and I think what Interim provides. And you're such a huge part of that right now, and I think it's just terrific, Katrina.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Just tell us a minute what you're doing now, what your job is now.
So now, after many years of trainings and going back and getting my education, I now am the peer outreach and advocacy coordinator. What that means to me is I give my peers options. I help them create what they want to be. I help them dream. We use their personal stories. They become empowered when they realize what they learned from their personal stories. talking about yourself and having that history and what you learned from it and being able to share that with others. We're called Success Over Stigma because we have successfully combated our own internal stigma and to realize the stigma that's external and how we use our lived experience as ways of showing and counterbalancing that we're okay, we're a part of this society, we're a part of this world, and we're going to make ourselves shine. We're going to be successful in our lives, and that's what we have been. That is what I am in. I am in charge of success.
I want to tell you, I remember the first time I met you, and you told me you were going to work for us, and there was no job. And we ended up having to create a job for what we knew you could do. So that I do remember, I met you when you were in the Macomb program, and you predicted that you would end up working for Interim.
And then another great peer that you work with, your colleague, is Antonio. And I understand that we have a short video of Antonio coming up. You want to give us a little information about Antonio and what we can expect from this video?
From Antonio, it's so, when you talk about full circle, along with myself, he has come full circle in his recovery. Prison, drug addiction, homelessness, getting yourself together, challenging the federal courts to be able to work, to be able to express himself, to give back what he got. And now he is working for that same program that outreached him. When you talk about full circle, when you talk about recovery, he is recovery walking. And those that are able to meet him and hear his story, he's a very, very compassionate and sensitive man. And he brings all of himself to every presentation.
Well, we'll see the video and we'll see that.
When I was 43, I did not know what I was going to do, what my life was going to be. I was resigned to the fact that I was going to die in addiction. But I had a number to a person, a family friend, who worked with Interim, and I called him, and Jody. In his interviewing, motivational, we put together a plan. I would have never imagined that I could get an apartment or be able to learn how to work again or manage my many different moods. These are the programs that help me in Interim. Success Over Stigma, Dual Recovery Services, DRS, peer-to-peer, crisis intervention training, Bridge House, Shelter Cove, who's working as a cook there, the Wellness Navigator program at Bridge House as an activities coordinator. With all the different programs that Interim offers, they have a program to work with individuals and what they may struggle with. They help to grow me up as a human, as an adult. I'm really grateful to Interim.
Welcome, Antonio.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell us, what were the biggest support mechanisms that helped you move off the street?
Well, one, the will not to be going to prison and making those bad decisions. But I had a family member who worked with Macomb, Jody Gully, and I started working with him and powwowed with him and told him what my situation was, and he helped me put together a plan that involved a extensive 12-step program. And from that program, I went immediately into Bridge House, which is dual diagnosis program, extensive. And things started, I had an understanding that I did not want to work because I wasn't ready. 42 years of bad behavior is not going to go away in 18 months. So fortunately, Macomb or Interim had a program that housed people. Through Interim, I participated in many services with Bridge House. They helped me with peer-to-peer. The C's program supported education, employment services, crisis intervention training, bringing the CIT, what is it called, the crisis team to Monterey County, was on a panel for that. There's a lot of good stuff that's coming with this, the funds that we get from Mental Health with California, and Interim and the county put them to very good use. And then having peers on the panel as well is a plus, because it really speaks to how dedicated they are to serving this population. So I'm really proud of Interim.
Hey, Antonio, can you talk about how peer support really helped you and how becoming a support to other people has helped you in your recovery, moving from homelessness really to being housed and employed and a mental health support worker?
So the formula that was created for Interim is basically a peer supported formula in the social, what's it called, social
rehab?
Yes, at Bridge House. The hard sell is getting everyone on board. And when you have one person that's committed to the sell, it draws everyone in and people thrive. And I learned that in prison through the SAP program, substance abuse program, and I learned it again with Bridge House. And I didn't realize that coming in through Macomb Plus with Jody and Mark, I actually work at Macomb now. And so I'm able to give that back. You can't keep it if you don't give it away.
So you've gone from being a client of Macomb to being employed by Macomb.
Yeah.
And so it's a combination of both professional support with clinicians and peer support that really helps move people from the streets?
Yeah, they call me the bridge. I've been called the mule because I do an excessive lot of hustling, getting them to appointments, getting them information that they might not need, that they may not know, and passing that information on to their caseworkers, et cetera. Trying to keep everybody in the loop. I'm like directing.
So can you sell to someone who's homeless, hey, I was homeless, I did this? Does it help rather than just a clinician saying to them, this is how to get off the streets? Does it help because you've been there?
It absolutely does, because being in that position when you're vulnerable and beaten, you don't want to hear someone with Burke smarts that's trying to tell you what's your issue. But if you have someone like me who's been there and said, just present it to them, hey, I've been there, and when you're ready, this is my card, give me a call, and we can make something happen. Just let me know when you're ready. And just being that face, and eventually something happens, and they're calling and asking for support, and things happen.
Did it take a long time for you to decide it was time to move out of your former lifestyle and into what you're in now? How long did that take?
So we're talking like 38 years of bad behavior, and it was not my decision. It was actually forced upon me by family members. And I will say that tough love does work. I do have a little resentment towards that, but I love my family now, and I was able to take care of a lot of things regarding that. So, and Macomb and Interim helped me with that as well.
And it sounds like you're a natural leader, that you have this presence that sort of commands respect, and I think your experience has a lot to do with that.
So now you're talking about stuff that I don't like to, I'm just Antonio. If people gravitate towards me, that's one thing, but everyone's included.
Yeah.
I'm always rooting for the underdog, and I'll go out of my way for anyone that wants to change their lifestyle, do something different. This is getting old, you might want to try something different.
We're glad to have you on the team.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well,
Glad to be
you're an
here.
inspiration. Thank you for sharing that with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So, moving on, Barbara, how does Interim fund housing development? How are services funded?
Well, there's two different things. One is funding the housing development, and that's funded usually through a combination of state, local, federal grants and loans, as well as grants and donations from local foundations and private individuals. We've had to fund sometimes $1 million or more of each project out of donations and grants. And right now, it's a very complicated process of putting it together. There's 3 different parts. One is the money for bricks and mortar for the actual building of housing. And then there's funding for the operations for housing, because the tenant rents certainly aren't going to cover the cost of it. So there needs to be long-term housing subsidies. And then the third part is funding the services. The services, the mental health services, the support services are usually funded through a combination of funding from the County of Monterey Behavioral Health Department. Sometimes it's federally funded through HUD, and then a combination with Medi-Cal funding. We are just starting to build our Sunrose housing project in Salinas, which is going to have housing for 17 people in individual apartments and also a shared transitional housing site. And we are still raising money for that project, even though we are starting construction now.
Well, it sounds like such a patchwork of different funding sources that are coming in. How important is the local share? I mean,
It's extremely important.
Yeah.
You can't do any of these projects without a lot of local support, and it's both political support and financial support.
Yeah. So, kind of changing the subject a little bit, but what can someone do if they have a family member in Monterey County who is homeless with a mental illness and living on the streets?
I think Kevin can answer that.
Well, they should contact Macomb. So, our phone number is 831-883-3030. And we have a whole team of outreach and engagement staff that can come out to where the person is and meet them where they are and get to know them and try to get to understand their unique situation and unique needs and help that person.
And how much does how much family involvement is needed in order to make that connection, other than calling Macomb?
Sure. One of the things about Macomb is that we're really a client-centered program.
Right.
In Interim, the whole agency is a client-centered agency. Right. We're very person-centered, and it really depends on the person. If the person wants a lot of involvement from their family, then we promote and engage the family and involve them a lot. If the person we're trying to serve doesn't want a lot of family involvement, then there isn't. It really depends on the person's unique situation and what they want.
If there's any families who need additional support or other services and Macomb cannot provide that support, we will go ahead and refer them to other services. So Macomb receives referrals from various organizations and entities. Sometimes it's from the family members, other times it's from businesses, from the hospitals, from the community. There's, people come across certain homeless individuals out in the street, so they connect with us and redirect to our services. Macomb, we can't do all by ourselves. Interim cannot provide the support to everyone by ourselves, so we usually work as a team and collaborate with other agencies.
Yeah, don't you also work with public safety, that you, for instance, work with the police departments or the sheriff's department of local areas who make referrals at times as well?
We do. We work very closely with a lot of the police departments, such as the Monterey Peninsula Police Department, Seaside, Marina, and Salinas.
Mm-hmm. And I know you've gotten referrals from faith communities, because I at times have gotten calls from churches about a homeless person that they've been supporting living outside in their site. I know we have been able to get some people that faith communities have referred as well.
We do. We work very closely with the Methodist Church in Salinas.
A lot of people would say that, there's no wrong way to come to Macomb. There's no one way to be referred to Macomb. Kind of all doors are open.
Thank you, Marisol. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us. Okay, Barbara, what are the top takeaways that you would like people to remember from tonight?
Well, number one is that we're not going to resolve homelessness without more affordable supportive housing. That is probably the most important need. Our community doesn't have enough affordable housing even for people who are not mentally ill or not disabled. So it is really difficult to get housing for people who are homeless with mental illness. The next most important factor is it's going to take a lot of money to build this housing. It's really quite expensive, and it takes a lot of community willpower. We're going to need both of those. The other important factor is one size does not fit all. People with mental illness who are homeless have really a very broad range of needs and a broad range of preferences. It is not build it and they will come. People have to feel comfortable with the location, the configuration of the housing. We've had many homeless people who have turned us down for housing units that we have offered to them because they don't like the location or they don't like the configuration or they're just not comfortable living there. So it's really important, and Interim seeks the opinions of our current clients and former clients when we select where to build housing and what the housing should be like. It's very important to do that. Housing, number three, housing is only the first task. It's keeping people housed is probably more difficult than even getting them into housing. And you need an extensive array of on-site flexible services to make that happen. We can try and find payees for people who can't manage their money. We can help people find in-home support services if they qualify to help them with shopping and cooking. And we can provide support to people to make sure that they can take medication if they need it. But people have to be willing to accept those services. And services, even though people say to us, well, can't you force people to take medication or can't you force them to accept services? The answer is no. And we have to work very hard to engage people so that they are willing to accept services and trust us enough to do it. It's essential to have those services very flexible and available on site. It is not a straight line trajectory of, okay, people are housed, things are wonderful. People's needs change, and it's really important to have the services change as they change. So sometimes people can need services every day. Sometimes they can need services once a month and sometimes once a week, and it changes all the time. The other thing is we have increasing healthcare needs. Most of our clients have multiple disabilities, not just a psychiatric disability. A lot of them have healthcare issues, and we have to have enough healthcare services to help them. Many of our clients have been with us for years on end. We have people who have been with us for 30 years and their needs change over time, and we have to have the units be available to them. We want to be here. We are kind of a forever service in many respects. We're here as long as people need us and want us. So we're gonna listen to one more story, which is about Sarah, and it really gives an example, a good example of what people need to be successful. Her story really embodies the goals of Interim.
When I entered the Bridge House program, that was probably the lowest part of my life. I was tired of just myself. I was tired of carrying around this gigantic bag of rocks. You know, all of my trauma, my despair, my self-loathing. And I really believe that Interim gave me that foundation to say, you have a second chance. And what I did was I went into the program of Interim and I went through the whole process, all their programs, Bridge House, Choices, all the different things that they did. And then gradually I got a job with Interim and I became a mentor to people. And they started to believe if I did it, they could do it. In the program, you have to write a 40-page letter about your life. I wrote 1,500 pages. I was taking my pad everywhere, crying, writing, going through the program, classes, healing. I was healing. Knowledge and wisdom can really benefit and liberate a person. And I feel that that's what this whole process has done. It's liberated me to be a good person to myself as well as to others. Interim has allowed me the opportunity to realize that all people come in all shapes and sizes and not to judge. And that's what makes me love working for this company. That's what makes me love knowing that I'm working for somebody that doesn't say, you work for me, you work with me. And together, we're gonna take people like you and we're gonna keep on helping them. And that everybody deserves dignity and respect. It's important to be able to open your arms to all people. And that's what Interim did to me, and that's what I want to do for others, and that's what we stand for.
Well, what an inspirational message Sarah was. And what an inspiration this entire event has been. Thanks, Barbara, for putting on this educational seminar and for the more than 45 years that Interim has worked on behalf of people with mental health issues in Monterey County. And thank you personally for inviting me. This has been awesome. And it's always inspirational for me to hear the stories of clients and staff that make Interim such a wonderful place. Thank you.
Well, thank you for emceeing today. This was a volunteer stint for you, and we couldn't have done it without you. We really want to thank our gold sponsors and all of our sponsors who helped to sponsor this event today. And also our awesome board of directors who supported us in doing this. And most of all, the staff and the clients of Interim. The clients work very hard and the staff works very hard to support them. And sometimes the clients and the staff are the same people at Interim. So I really want to thank everybody who shared their stories with us today. It's not really easy for people to tell personal stories. And thank you for everybody for watching.